Hello, Guardians. It is Ebontis, and Season of the Chosen, aka Season 13, is wrapping up. It was a nice improvement to Destiny 2 in some areas, and yet also left some staleness in the air. 2 steps forward in narrative in PvE, and yet no steps anywhere in PvP. Depending on which type of player you are, your thoughts on this season could be very different. So let's see where we ended up. This season's story was different, in a good way. We didn't have a direct villain, per se, but we got more dialogue, NPC interaction, and story beats than we probably ever have. We learned more about Caiatl and the Cabal during gameplay, which was novel for Destiny, voice dialogue during Battlegrounds, and many other places, and a couple mid-season cinematics told a unique story for Destiny, one that most people got to experience because it was presented in-game. Crow got more growth and exposure this season, and many are really starting to empathize with him. Even Zavala seems okay with his existence. While Saladin wants to eliminate every Cabal with no remorse, diplomacy is what Zavala was aiming for, and mostly seems to have succeeded. While the season was front-loaded with story, I appreciate that Tuesdays moved the story forward for a couple of months, and if you had missed a few weeks, you were able to catch up. So overall, I think it was a good delivery system, and overall I think it was a decent story. I'm still torn personally whether I like the weekly drip feed of a season or whether I like the expansion, just kind of giving it all to you at once. But if we are going to get a seasonal story in this fashion, at least giving it to us mostly in the beginning of the season, maybe having some space in the end of the season is totally fine with me. We also got an expansion to the story with the exotic mission Presage. It was leaked a little bit, but it was a very cool mission to say the least. We got to learn about the darkness and what Callus was trying to do with them, and also got some more discussions with Caiatl, so a nice tie into the kind of antagonist of the season. The mission itself was amazing. It was a reference to Star Wars, to Alien, and just general creepy vibes throughout. The Bungie team who created this one absolutely nailed the atmosphere, the weird alien ship. You had audio, which was just amazingly well done to give this monstrosity roaming around behind the walls. And overall, the loot, the random rolled Dead Man's Tale, seems to have made most everybody happy in one way or another. I think this mission did things extremely well, and I don't want to have to replay a mission 20 times to get everything out of a mission. I do understand Bungie's reasoning for wanting us to have some replayability and, extended engagement, because these are not easy missions for them to make, and they want to make sure everyone gets a good value out of them, and they get a decent amount of engagement for their metrics as well. So overall, I don't think anybody has anything too bad to say about Presage. We learned a lot more about Cabal, Caiatl, Callus, and got a very cool weapon that is pretty potent right now. We'll talk about here in a little bit. Battlegrounds also joined the game this season as the main vehicle for both seasonal loot and to deliver parts of the story. The discussion of enemy density seemed to arise a couple times between this and one of the strikes, and we've learned Bungie has some technical limitations depending on how many enemies are on screen. So Bungie will continue to flirt the line, doing as much as they can within, the vehicle that is Destiny 2. We got 4 Battlegrounds in total, and while there were small variations between the different locations and the experiences, they were mostly the same mechanics. And while I don't expect them to reinvent the wheel every time we get a new location, a little bit more variety in maybe at least the boss encounters would make these feel a little bit more fresh as you ended up having to play them quite a bit. Believe me, this was a huge improvement over throwing balls in a public event, but I think the bosses were a little too samey for my taste, so a little variation there I think would have given this a nice touch to be a good 3-person activity for the season. Battlegrounds tied very much into the Helm, which was the new addition to the tower this season, and the Helm was used to tell a decent chunk of the story. We got the War Table, which I'll cover a little bit more of its functional reasons, but it's mostly where we got to experience the NPCs talking to each other. We got to see Zavala, Osiris, and Saladin, or at least, projections of themselves, talking around a table. We got a voicemail from Caiatl We got to see Osiris talking to Caiatl, trying to figure out a way to get Zavala on board. Overall, I think it was a great addition if this is something they needed to be able to tell the stories they wanted to. If the tower wasn't quite a space where they feel like they could get this done and the Helm allowed them to tell the story with all these NPCs, the voice dialogue, the interactions like we got, I am completely on board because the story that we got out of the season, as I said, we've had more about, Cabal and our, antagonist Caiatl, the different opinions of each of the main guardians between Saladin wanting to just go ham and kill all of them, Crow kind of going behind the scenes to figure some things out, Osiris playing lots of sides, Zavala trying to play the diplomatic. We got to see all of that played out basically in front of our eyeballs instead of having to read it in a lore book or something. So overall, the addition of the Helm just to tell the story alone was great. The Helm and the War Table also tied into something else, and that was our seasonal quest item, the Hammer of Proving. Now, this was our link to both Umbral Engrams and a very grindy / time-gated upgrade path at the War Table. While the hammer did have a satisfying slam to open the chest, I think most people can agree that was fairly cool, the system around that was somewhat complicated, to say the least. You would have to earn Cabal in activities, so that's our way to get pushed back into Crucible, Gambit, and Strikes. You'd use that gold to slot in a medallion into the hammer to get a charge of some kind. You'd take that hammer into Battlegrounds, you would smash the chest and therefore build up a charge in the hammer. Then you would use that hammer at the Prismatic Recaster to forge Umbral Engrams with those charges. If you didn't catch all that, that's okay, but that's basically what we've been up to. So not only did it take weeks to upgrade the hammer to allow for more capacity and efficiency, the Umbral Engrams themselves actually have proven not really to be worth this whole grind. If you were to spend 3 or, God forbid, 5 charges on one engram, and then you learned that your piece of armor that you paid with 5 charges that could have taken you an hour to grind out wasn't even guaranteed to be a high stat roll, you were probably going to be upset. And most people were. Honestly, most people figured out that you would take the single charge of the hammer and dump that into a bunch of weapon rolls, and that was mostly it. The armor didn't seem to be worthwhile, and if you wanted weapon rolls, spending 5 charges for one specific roll or spending 1 charge on 5 different rolls tended to net you out a little bit better because you'd get more options, more variety, and still probably better odds of getting what you're going for. So hopefully they rework some of the Umbral Engram system, the charges, and however we're going to handle this next season, we'll just have to see. But the Umbral Engram system and the very time-gated part of Hammer of Proving, that is something I'm hoping they do review. While maybe not in Season 14 because it was probably already in the works before it got started, maybe in Season 15 that we don't know anything about yet coming in August, maybe we'll get some changes there. But overall, this one was pretty grindy and not really worth your effort. As for additional content, we did get one brand new strike, Proving Grounds, which was kind of the culmination of the story with Caiatl and our fight against her top champion, us being the Guardians top champions, and of course we won, which, finished off with a nice little cinematic. The strike itself wasn't bad. Being inside of a giant tank was kind of cool, so it was mostly an interior strike. You did get to see a couple places where you got to see the big giant tank treads, but outside of that, there wasn't a lot that this would mostly just be a strike indoors. The strike itself wasn't anything crazy exciting, and honestly, it was just kind of like another battleground. Once you got to the boss basically worked like one of the battleground bosses. So, again, we got a general theme of the seasonal activity, and this strike held over. It's not overly bad, I would say. It's fine. It's not like I wanted the corrupted or 10 damage phases on like a hollowed lair boss. And a shorter strike sometimes is a good thing in the playlist, because we all know there's some that come up and you almost just want to leave the playlist to try and get something else. This will definitely not be that. I just, as it was just basically another battleground, I guess I was hoping for a smidge more, again, in some variation when it came to the boss, and sadly we didn't get that. But overall, not a bad strike, and at least it's something new in the strike playlist. We also got 2 more strikes, but these were reprised from Destiny 1. We got Devil's Lair, which mostly stuck to its roots. A lot of enemies, those couple open areas, the boss fight, and the music there was pretty awesome. I love that Devil's Lair boss fight rock music track. That one's pretty awesome. We also got Fallen Saber, and this one got a bit of a change to the boss with immunity phases, which I wasn't a big fan of, but overall, they were fine. These were nothing completely different from what they were before. A couple variations and changes here and there. We have Briggs now in Devil's Lair, and in Fallen Saber, as I said, not anything too drastic in changes. Difficulty on these didn't seem to be too drastic when it came to Grandmasters either, as they made their rotation into there. But overall, the Strike playlist getting 3 more strikes, 1 brand new and 2 reprised from Destiny 1, not a bad thing. I just wish the 2 strikes that we got from Destiny 1 had some story reason to be in the game. Maybe there is something buried in a lore card somewhere, but the fact that we have Devil's Lair and Fallen Saber back and there wasn't any real reason to bring them back, just here's more strikes. And besides giving a reason for the Cosmodrome to exist, there wasn't much else that tied them into the world, so they just seemed a bit arbitrary, at least to me, but that's just me. Alright, now let's talk about the loot this season. Weapons, armor. First thing, we got the seasonal exotic Ticuu's Divination, pretty much when you logged in, if you had the season pass, and I wasn't sure how a new bow was going to play out versus something like Trinity Ghoul, which with its new catalyst is pretty amazing. And I'm honestly going to say Ticuu's Divination pretty much holds up. It's a cool solar option. It's unique in a way where you tag multiple enemies, then you get the chain explosions. Overall, I think Ticuu's Divination, especially with the catalyst in that one as well, holds its own in the exotic bow department, so this was a pleasant addition. Dead Man's Tale was the other exotic we got this season, and this came from the Presage mission. First time through, you got a question mark roll, and then you would be working in future runs on a weekly basis to get random rolls on this exotic. So overall, it's kind of a cool weapon. So you've got a 120 round per minute scout rifle. You've got the increased damage and kind of an iron sights feel, somewhat similar to Last Word because it is Tex Mechanica. It's a weapon that many people have enjoyed. While it may be a bit too powerful on PC at the moment, I think that's probably going to get reined in soon. Overall, scout rifles not being in a great place, they actually took an exotic scout rifle and made a lot of people enjoy it, and it's had a lot of use this season. So overall, I think both exotics for weapons this season have been success. As for the exotic armor this season, each one I think has had a decent discussion about its potency, so that alone I'm going to give Bungie credit for bringing something new and interesting to each class. Titans, Hunters, and Warlocks don't always win when it comes to new exotic armor. Some of it's kind of a dud. So the fact that each class had something that, you know, kind of adds new functionality to a certain build, I think overall is a win in the exotic armor department. When you've already got a lot of choices, they still made a couple things that actually feel fresh and fun. So I think these were a general win without breaking anything, but overall pretty fun. The pursuit weapon this season, Salvager Salvo, has been fun to use for me, at least in PvE, because the chain reaction perk is really fun to explode a lot of enemies. So that one's actually gotten a lot of use out of me. Some people may not love it in PvP, but I think in general, I'm really enjoying the fact that if you are decent with a grenade launcher, learning the timing, you know, the bounces of geometry and stuff like that, sometimes you get those occasional moments where it feels good. You know, there is also probably some feels bad where you get the direct hit by a grenade launcher with spike grenades and you die, but I don't think it's often enough that it's a big worry. And I think generally this is a nice pursuit level weapon without breaking things at an exotic level. So overall, I think Salvager Salvo is pretty cool. As for the playlist weapons for this season, we had some decent ones. Frozen Orbit, Royal Entry, and especially Bottom Dollar were very highly sought after between either their stats, their archetypes, or their perk combinations. The only issue with all of these is how many other options are in the same loot pool. There are many people who probably went through an entire Gambit Infamy reset and didn't see one of these bottom dollars. I think I've seen 2, and I've done 1 reset, and I feel almost lucky having seen a couple of them. So there are a lot of people who want a weapon and can't really get it, and there's not really a directed path to get there. So maybe something they could add is maybe a bounty you could work on. You're going to have to spend some time in Gambit, but if you do, you get a roll on a bottom dollar. There's enough random perk combinations on most of these where you're not guaranteed to get the one you want, but some type of directed path towards some of these weapons would help at least focus your grind a little bit as opposed to being completely RNG. The weapons themselves are actually fairly cool, but the path to them seems to be excessively long or very, very RNG based. So I don't, again, know how they correct this one, but they probably need to look at making these weapons a bit more accessible or grindable of some way. Nightfall exclusive weapons and adept versions in Grandmasters were added to the loot pool this season, and a prize many went for. The Palindrome in PvP is a 140 hand cannon that, with the right perks, can definitely play at a high level. You've got Shadow Price. While autos aren't in a great place, it's actually getting a small buff next season, And then you had the Swarm come in as well, and at the same time the Swarm dropped for the first time, for at least the Adept version, we also got to see some Adept Grandmaster perks, like Adept Big Ones, that makes a couple normal perks together a bit more efficient. So I think generally, for me, like once you may get one or two of these and you get a decent roll, Grandmasters probably still need a little bit more when it comes to the loot pool and stuff that's in there. I think the weapons they added in have been reasonably well liked this season. But again, once you get a decent roll, your incentive to go back into, say, a Grandmaster is much lower. Outside of the fact that the gilded title doesn't even last that long. Changes along that front may be something to discuss later. But overall, the weapons I think they added in this season weren't bad. But I don't think they are going to do enough to fix the overall, like, reason for the casual to work to get into a Grandmaster. That's a discussion for another day. But overall, I think the weapons were decent that they added in. And then the Adept perks that you can now get with regards to a Grandmaster PvE activity, that's a nice addition as well. Then we get into seasonal challenges. This is basically Bungie's departure from the weekly bounties, which I think is a positive thing. Granted, most of these still feel like bounties, so it's not a huge departure, but it is a bit of a change. Part of these happened just by participating in this season's story, going to the war table, doing the specific battleground of the week. They were pretty straightforward. Others were very, very grindy. One of them, for example, did require an entire infamy reset, and that one came out before you needed to get kills in Gambit. So, while part of my issue is the fact that some were grindy, you have a full season to do those. The fact that the ones that launched later were not retroactive to things you'd already done in the season was not a great look and kind of turned me off on trying to complete all of these. I spent enough time in Gambit to get a full infamy reset whenever that one, whichever week that launched. So in, say, like week 7 or week 8 or something, when it's like, okay, now go into Gambit and get 40 PvP kills in Gambit, I was kind of done. Now, I do feel like I got more Bright Dust this season than I feel like I have before. And sure, if you had 3 characters, you did every weekly bounty and repeatables, you were able to earn more, but I would probably guess in general, more people ended up with more Bright Dust this season than they had before. So I think that change isn't bad. Also, I feel like the experience you get from some of these challenges is a good chunk, and my seasonal level is actually reasonably high, mostly on account of some of these challenges. So I do think the system isn't bad, but could use some tweaks. Anything that launches should be retroactive from what you've done through the season. Tone down some of the grind on some of the challenges. And then as for the final seasonal activity, Master of All, probably tone down the number that you don't need to get. I think there's 77 total challenges and you can only miss 2. And outside of those, it's really going to be a bit of a grind if you're trying to get it all. Now, if Destiny is your game, yeah, you're probably going to end up knocking this one out. But somewhere just a little bit of balancing on the grindy nature, the retroactivity, and then maybe this final seasonal challenge would put these in a decent place. They're not a bad change from weekly bounties. I think they still just need a little bit of tweaking to kind of hit the right note for the long term. Then we have to talk about Guardian Games. Now, this was the end of the season activity. We've had it before, and unfortunately it was not very different from last time. We had the same exotic. While we did get a Catalyst, it didn't take that long to get. Hunters seemed to be winning out of the gate, and they did end up winning overall, so some people may feel like the way it was set up might have been not fair, but there's only so much one can do about that one. I'm not that concerned about who won Guardian Games, but it really wasn't that different. There was a strike playlist, but it was an 1100 strike playlist, so even the modifiers didn't really make anything that much more threatening, because it's not like a high difficulty activity where modifiers are going to make you think. You're going to be fine pretty much no matter what you do in 1100 level strike. As for Heir Apparent, more people are able to get the weapon this time if you missed it last season, so that's fine. And the Catalyst is a nice addition, that wasn't too bad of a grind, and it gives you, 75% damage reduction while your shield is up, so that's not a bad one in general. But I basically finished my participation in Guardian Games in a couple of hours. Once I finished up my Catalyst for Heir Apparent, had done a couple of medals, I was kind of done. So next season, instead of medals, which basically were bounties, and having so much in the Eververse, a bit more of an option to, say, grind out some of the armor as opposed to buy it from Eververse to be able to get some of these things would be a nice quality of life nod, because if you don't want to spend money in Eververse, you probably did not get too much out of Guardian Games, and I thought we were moving away from that, but it seems like you still pretty much had to dive into Eververse to get most out of this event. And just that little bit, if you could grind a decently large chunk of hours, but some people could grind for the armor instead of buy it, people totally would. And I think that would be a nice option on some of these events, because the seasonal ones seem to be very Eververse, and just it would be nice to have the option. Some people might just be like, I don't have enough time, I'm going to buy it, and you'll still get a decent amount of people to do that. But maybe some people who would like to but can't, then on that side would be able to actually, you know, spend extra time in your game anyway, getting your engagement and all of that type of stuff up, and allow them to earn something that otherwise they would have to buy. So, little look at the seasonal events not being quite so heavy in the Eververse. I know these things are based around the Eververse, but they still got to look at that because it seems to be leaning too heavy in that department, hoping that gets a switch. And we cannot wrap this season's discussion without talking about Crucible. Crucible is still sitting out here waiting for a PvP map since Shadowkeep. Cheaters in Trials are very rampant. DDoSers on console, I think, might be getting a bit of problems when it comes to next season. But overall, Trials Osiris being canceled multiple weekends for a few reasons. Win trading alone was hilarious to figure out how that one worked. But I mean, you've got the survival playlist that really hasn't been refreshed in a while. We still have the same modes, haven't seen a new one in ages. There are less maps due to the Destiny content vault and sunsetting of some of the content. And while we're getting one or two old modes back of like Team Scorched and Momentum Control, those were in Destiny 2 and then just taken out, and now those are being put back in. But we haven't seen a new mode in a while. Iron Banner as well. Iron Banner is very stale. We're getting a couple new weapons next season, sure. But again, there's not even like a different mode in Iron Banner. It's always Control. There's not even an option of like Iron Banner Rumble or Iron Banner Elimination or something else. And I know they want just general people to play Iron Banner. But I mean, come on. Once a season, you could totally throw like Rift in there. I don't know the effort it takes to put Rift into Destiny 2. It might be more work than everybody thinks. But at this point, PvP needs some love. Because if you're a PvP-focused player, while the story has been okay, the issues with Trials being canceled multiple times and not a whole lot of else coming into anything on this Crucible page, we need to talk about Crucible, and Bungie needs to address it. The recent TWAB, the only thing they mentioned in the last couple of TWABs was that some of the sandbox like Crucible team, they're working on some changes with regards to Stasis. People are also exploding about Stasis and Trials and still complaining. A couple nerfs later, we still have Stasis being a dominant class. They're working on it, but it's still a pretty heavy one in there. I don't expect Stasis to go away. I don't. That's just going to be part of PvP, and they're going to work on balancing it. But you have a mode that hasn't got a lot of love, and then you have a subclass that makes it feel bad. So overall, there is the rumor of another IP that Bungie is working on that could be heavily PvP focused. And if a lot of their PvP guys have moved over to work on that one, and that is why, at some point they do need to address the elephant in the room, that is the lack of PvP anything in future seasons. I mean, we keep getting seasonal trailers talking about all this stuff, and outside of Trials launching a way back, there hasn't much PvP related in ages. So that is still one of those things that needs talked about, looked at, and addressed, and hopefully they do say something about it over the course of the next season, because if they don't touch it in Witch Queen, people are probably going to start giving up hope. Witch Queen, I think, is where, not like a make or break moment for Destiny. Destiny is not going anywhere. But with regards to PvP in Destiny, if there isn't anything of substantial change in Witch Queen to PvP, I feel like that could take things too far. Like, if there's not a PvP map in Witch Queen, I think that's going to start telling all the Crucible players they're not going to see a lot of love. So overall, I would definitely say Season of the Chosen is in the top half of seasons easily. Storytelling has been great. The voice dialogue, the Caiatl experience that we got with like kind of an antagonist leading into an ally. It's been a very interesting season in story, and while I'm still kind of trying to get on board with the drip feed story style, if it's at least front-loaded, like, 7 weeks I'm going to get story, the rest of the season you can kind of tune out if you want to, or play it here and there if you need, catch up on stuff when you want to. I'm okay with that, if that's going to be the seasonal model, because if you're trying to make me log in every single week, I'm not going to be a fan. But if you're like, hey, at the start of the season we're going to tell a cool story every week, then Tuesdays is definitely going to still be my Destiny day. So hopefully that type of stuff goes forward. But the big glaring silence around PvP is is really starting to become apparent for some people. And I'm not even a heavy Crucible player, but there are definitely people who want some discussion with regards to the topic. So overall, I don't know how I would rate Season of the Chosen on a number scale, because some really good things, some gaping holes is kind of a weird, middle ground of decency. But I would definitely put it above, some seasons like Drifter and Season of the Worthy. But again, Season of Dawn was also a really cool season, but I would definitely say it's towards the higher end of seasons for sure, I think, in general. But that's basically what I got. Let me know down below your thoughts about this season, if you enjoyed it, if you have issues that you would like to see addressed, if you're a PvP player and just still can't stand, the silence. Whatever your thoughts about the season may be, let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, drop a like on it. It's always a nice way to support the channel. And if you're new to the channel and you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see future stuff, that alert bell will hopefully get my videos into your feed. You guys can also find me over on Twitter. That's all like news, other games, stuff like that. And you guys can find me on twitch.tv/Ebontis. Thank you all very much. Have an awesome one, and I'll see you in the next one.